Well, welcome. Good morning to another version of Tell Me a Story. These Tell Me Stories are brought to you by the Friends of the Sandwich Town Archives. My name is Joan Osgood, and I'm a volunteer at the Friends of the Sandwich Town Archives. I have today that we're going to be interviewing and chatting with Miss Barbara Bassett, who has many long-term relatives in Sandwich that we're going to be talking about. Good morning, Barbara.
Morning.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, I know that you have a lot of relatives, a lot of names that people who know about Sandwich history are going to recognize. Mm-hmm. So could you tell me just a little bit, before we get into more current history for you, you yourself living in Sandwich, but could you tell me a little bit about your ancestors, especially the ones that lived here in Sandwich?
Well, we found out when my grandmother died and went through the secretary, which was a lovely desk in the living room, which we'd never explored.
Yes.
And that her husband, my Grandpa George, whom I never knew because he died before I was born, had done a genealogy. So we found out that our family came over on the second boat, which I forgot at the moment the name. It might have been Fortune. And the second boat in Plymouth.
Yeah.
Now,
the first one being the Mayflower.
Mayflower. Whether the second boat came the very next year or several years later, I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. And then I found out that the Bassett family had four children. Yes. And they moved to Bridgewater, Massachusetts. Came across that in a book about the Mayflower families, the White family, because we had a story that our great aunt Sarah, my dad's 9th or 8th great aunt Sarah Bassett, married Peregrine White. So I thought I'd look up the White family, and it said the Bassets moved to Bridgewater, Massachusetts. Now, one of the sons was William. Now, whether he is the one that moved down here from Bridgewater to Sandwich or the second William,
his son, yes.
I am 12th generation. And so Grandpa George had listed all of them, and there was a William, Thomas, Lemuel, Oliver, Ezra, George, that's my grandfather, and Alan, my dad.
Oh my gosh. That's something. Boy, you could remember all of those.
Yeah. Yes. And my cousin Sue Doucette had also made a genealogy chart with her family, the Pierces, and the Fosters, which was her mother's family. And since her mother was related to the Bassets, they put the Bassett tree on the same chart, and so that was rather neat.
So that is neat. So you are related to the Fosters in town, which we have interviewed. Yeah. Carol Foster Telligan, which is really neat. Yeah. So Carol would be
her second cousin once removed.
Wonderful.
Her father was my second cousin.
Okay. Yeah. And the Pierces? You're related to the Pierces?
Yeah, well, because Betty Foster
married the Pierces. Yes, so that would be by marriage.
Yes. Yeah, Betty was my second cousin. Yes.
And I think that you go back to the Nyes in some way.
Yes, we do. Yes. Looking at this genealogy, and also down at the Cedarville Cemetery, there are 5 generations there. And my great-grandfather, Ezra, I remember my grandmother always put flowers there, and next door to his tombstone was his father, who was Oliver, and on the other side was a Lemuel, married to a Temperance Nye.
Oh my gosh, okay.
And then I found out they lived
helped you.
on Spring Hill, I don't mean Spring Hill Road, Old County Road, the Cedarville area. And she was in the house, probably the Nye Homestead Museum, and down the road a piece, about 4 houses, was where the Bassets lived. Unfortunately, that house burned in the 70s or 80s, 1970s or 80s. But
yes. Now you talked about Ezra Bassett. Yeah. We have this really wonderful picture here of your great-grandfather and your great-grandmother. Can you tell us a little about this?
Yes, well, when we went through that secretary and came across great-grandpa's log, he went to sea at 18 in 1857 and sailed out of Boston on the Ezra Foster. What a coincidence.
Oh, isn't that
and
something?
he didn't get home until 2 years later. And the account, he does latitude and longitude. I once plotted it out on a map of the world, and he sailed south and around the Horn in the wintertime.
Oh, gosh.
He writes about
And he was only 18 years old.
Yeah, and the things he did, mainly peeling potatoes and, and working on the lines and mending sails.
Sure.
It was a merchant ship, and they went around the Horn. They went up to San Francisco, over to Honolulu, and then across to China, and mentions the Mindanao Straits, which is part of the Philippines. And when they got to Canton, China, they had to reline the hull. New copper sheeting.
Okay.
And then they left and sailed through Indonesia, which of course then was called Dutch West Indies.
West Indies.
And stopped in Bali, and then went across the Indian Ocean, and apparently did not stop in Africa. Went around it and up into the Atlantic Ocean, and apparently did not stop in either Africa coast or across to the South America, but went up to Maine and then sailed down east. To get into Boston, you had to go north of Boston and then sail down east, hence the expression.
Oh, very interesting. Yes, certainly, yeah. So at 18 years old, what an experience. Off he goes for 2 years, you said.
Yeah,
in that initial journey.
Initial journey, and he must have done others. And then finally, and the Civil War came, and that's he's in his Civil War
outfit.
He was an ensign in the Navy.
He was.
And this is his discharge papers.
Oh my gosh, isn't that wonderful?
We had in our house, which that is probably, I don't know, 28 by 24 picture of the boat he sailed on, which was
blown
called
up,
Kikipu, which I found out was a Indian tribe name, Texas Indians. And he sailed in the Gulf Stream Squadron and possibly went up the Mississippi River, I'm not sure. But they were there to barricade a port. Possibly.
During the war.
During the war.
Yes.
And then he was discharged in 1865, I guess, or 60. Yeah, 1865.
And came back to Sandwich.
Providence, actually. They lived. And he had one child, a daughter, Lucy. And there was no sailing, and he and his two brother-in-laws, who were married to his wife's two sisters, the three of them went to Topeka, Kansas.
Oh, after
I don't know why.
Yes,
my grandfather George Bassett was born out there.
Okay.
And then, sadly, he died early. He died at 43, and his third child wasn't even born yet.
So he and his wife. They did not live in Sandwich for that long.
Probably, that's interesting. I really don't know.
Yeah.
I'm assuming in the Bassett house where I grew up on 6A.
Yep.
Because but maybe not, because come to think of it, they bought that house in 1883 after they came back from Topeka. My great-grandmother's sister, Lucy Higgins, bought the house.
Oh, okay. Now, the house we're talking about is on 6A. It's the rather large colonial set back from the road right next to Hedgerow.
Right.
Is it not? Yes.
Yes, but initially it was down about 3 feet from the road.
Oh, no, sir.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
We moved it back in 1937.
Really?
Because the house didn't have electric or running water or heat.
Sure.
It was part of the Hedgerow house. Mr. McKnight's house was initially a boys' school.
Yes.
And our house was the dormitory.
Now,
when it got separated and moved over to that plot of land, I don't know, my great-aunt Lucy bought it from Gustavus Howland. We found a little booklet.
In this desk.
In this desk,
this desk really was very good.
The first taxes were $12. And I think they bought it for $1,700. I'm not sure.
Isn't that something?
And then she lists all the things she bought from a Mr. Wheelock, or he helped repair things and paint and so forth and so forth.
In the house, in the family, which became the family homestead at that point.
Yes, and so Lucy and because see, maybe my grandfather died by that time, 1883.
Yes. Yeah.
And so she had, my grandfather didn't come east from Topeka till he was about 8 or 9.
Oh, okay.
He
That's
stayed
George
out.
Bassett.
George Bassett.
Yes.
But Lizzie and her sister Lucy and her daughter Lucy came east.
Now, you had a very interesting story about your great-grandmother that we were chatting about before this interview,
Yeah.
which was quite remarkable.
Yes, sadly, she got rheumatoid arthritis.
Yes.
And ultimately, her knees and her hips locked in a sitting position. So she had to be hoisted into bed. And her daughter took care of her all her life.
All her life.
After that.
Yes.
And it was rather young. But first it was her sister Lucy. Well, Lucy probably died at the turn of the century.
1900s.
1900s. But great-grandma lived to, I think, till 1918, say.
Did she really? Wow. Yes.
Yes, because my Aunt Sally, who was born in 1912, remembers her in her wheelchair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. In that house,
In that
which is right
house,
next
yes.
door to Dodge
Yeah.
McKnight's.
Right.
Yes. That is so interesting. So at some point, those Dodge McKnight's hedgerow and your house were part and parcel of the same
Yes,
thing.
and
then
it
at
was
some
the
point
boys'
it was
school.
divided, and it was his
And,
dormitory for his boys' school.
Yes.
Yes.
And in fact, when we had one of the rooms, the older part of the house, repapered, the painter said, "This was never this big. This looks like it was at least 3 rooms."
Oh.
So you see, and my bunk room was a small room, and my cousin's bunk room, which was probably original, the dormitory rooms.
were smaller because they were the
Yeah,
original
and
dormitories.
they might have had, let's see, if that was 3 in the big room, 4 or 5, and another one, six rooms. And my dad said that he and his cousins, Lucy Bassett's children, they stayed up in the attic. There were dormers, and the boys were up there.
Up there, yeah.
And my sister, and then his Irene Foster, well, she was Irene Lloyd then. She and my 2 aunts stayed downstairs with. It was quite a full house.
It was quite a full house, in
Every
other words.
summer.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Yeah, so.
So this is, not only do you have clearly a long history, your family in Sandwich, let's talk a little bit about you now, growing up in Sandwich.
Well, we moved there from New Jersey. My mother died in 1936.
Okay.
And they couldn't quite keep one house in Montclair, New Jersey, and the house in Sandwich. So they decided, we'll keep the house in Sandwich. They sold the New Jersey house. Now, with that money, they had to make the house more modern.
Sure.
Because there was no running water and no central heat and no electricity. So they got an architect, and they moved it back 100 feet on a foundation of 2 garages and a big furnace room, and added a wing which had the bathrooms, a laundry room, 3 bedrooms, and we ended up with an 11-room house.
Wow. Yes, it is pretty large house. You can tell that
Yeah,
from
now
just driving by.
And there we sat.
And
My grandmother and her sister-in-law, Lucy Bassett Lloyd, and myself, and no other young children in the neighborhood at all on Spring Hill Road.
Wow.
Daddy called it Old Maid's Alley. It was, but really, a lot of widows.
No children. Yeah, yes.
There was the Toulis farm, and Mrs. Toulis was a widow, and Arnie and his wife didn't have children. And next door, Mr. McKnight and his sister-in-law,
sister.
Elise Carell.
Yeah.
Across the street, Mrs. Tangney. On the corner, Isa Foster. You keep on going, is Mrs. Rose. And another lady who ultimately married Mr. Gardner. And then keep going around the hill, as we call it.
Yep.
Oh, she was a widow, Martha Foster.
Okay.
Yeah, and so there was, her children were grown. One had passed away on a motorcycle accident, and Gifford was 12 years older than I, so there was no young children. And there was Cora and Beta that lived in the Fort House, Wing Fort House.
The Wing Fort House, yes.
And then there were the Wings, which was the girls' school originally. I think they weren't married. And you keep on going, and there's Eda Roos, and Martha Blake. And
Oh, sure,
they
that's
weren't
right,
there.
and they
so,
weren't, yes.
So the children came along about the time I graduated from high school.
Okay, so you really
Not
didn't
quite.
have a lot of
But
people
no,
to...
finally another child came.
Oh,
That
no.
was great. 5th grade, Billy Walker, the Walkers came.
Oh,
So we
okay.
had 2 kids in the neighborhood.
So you really depended a lot for social activities for the school, going to your school,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
would have been
We
the
had the-
HT Wing School.
Yeah, the bus would pick us up with all the East Sandwich kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it had 2 more stops. And then the rest of the people walked to school,
Oh, they did.
if there were any other. Our nearest were the Freemans one way and the Halls the other for young people. The Henry Hall
Henry Hall,
was a year older than I, and going up the road a little further was high schoolers. There were the Lawrences, and then let's see.
Who lived? Let me see now. Who lived across the street from Henry Hall, by the Twin
There
Ponds?
weren't any children there.
There.
Down the road at Pisa, opposite the Magnusons, which is now the Gibbses, that
Yes.
was a school.
Yep.
It was the family, the Roses.
Oh,
It
okay.
was Joe and his 2 sisters.
That's where now Quaker Meeting House Road feeds into
Yeah.
Route 6A. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it was
Yeah.
dirt.
And-
Quaker
well,
Meeting House
Quaker
was-
Meeting House Road, there was no-
dirt, and
yes.
Gully Lane was a dirt road.
Dirt, yeah, yeah.
But Arnie Toulis's farm, he was the milkman.
I was going to ask you. Okay, so
Yeah, we
he
got our
was the-
milk from him.
So you got your milk from Arnie Toulis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Raw milk it was.
Yeah.
They come to think of it. It
Yeah.
wasn't pasteurized.
It was not. Where did you get your food?
Well,
Was there-
next
was it-
door, Mr. McKnight's wonderful, wonderful caretaker or whatever, Axel Magnuson.
Oh yes.
He was the chauffeur. He was the gardener. He was the landscaper. Does everything. Well, every Wednesday, he would take Mrs. Tangney and Miss Elise, which was Mr. McKnight's
Sister-in-law. Yep.
and my grandmother, Catherine Bassett, and they would go uptown to do the shopping every Wednesday.
And they would express it as uptown.
Oh yes.
Oh yes.
It was always uptown. Yes.
Yeah. It's only like, I don't know. It's not even hardly a mile, but
well,
they
no,
would.
it's 2 miles.
Two
It's
mi- is it
to
really? Okay.
2 miles to the traffic light, which was the only traffic light.
Yes, at that point. Yes.
And uptown.
Uptown.
And they'd shop in Russell's Market and Mr. Hoy's.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And
Russell's-
later, Abe's. But
and
that-
later A.B. Alvizi's,
Right.
yes, which was on Java. So we've got A.B. Alvizi's store on Java Street.
Oh, yeah.
We've got Mr. Hoy's
Now,
store.
Mr. Hoy's was in that neat building, which was Mr. Pratt's Pharmacy.
Yes.
Mr. Hoy's grocery store, the post office, and Mr. Fournier's barbershop.
Barber shop. Yep. Right
And
on
then down
Route
the
6A.
street was the Russells, Mr. Russell's meat mart. Well, we mainly got the meats there.
Yes. Yes. He had. He was really sort of known for his meats.
Then
Yes.
there was an interesting little store. I think their name was Smith.
Okay.
I always forget the name of the street. But it ran off Main Street, parallel to Liberty and parallel to Jarvis. I forget the name, but on the corner of that is
Summer.
it's
In between. Summer is in between Liberty and Jarvis.
Liberty. No. Next one, no, the other way.
Okay.
We would go in the shop in there. I don't exactly know what, but I loved the Smith Brothers cough drops. And I remember, I was so embarrassed afterwards and felt so guilty. I swiped a box.
Oh, did you?
I just love
dear.
that licorice taste. But we did. Then the treat was buying Necco wafers.
Oh yes.
So maybe they had more candies.
Maybe it was a candy store.
Maybe it was a candy store.
Sure. Yeah.
But on the corner of that street in Maine is what used to be the Methodist church is now the Masons.
Oh yes.
Yeah, and there was downstairs was a women's club met.
Downstairs in the
In the church.
Masonic hall.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Back then.
I
was a
never
women's club.
ever went up, knew it as a church.
Yes.
But the basement was used as a women's club when I was a little kid.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So this store that you're referring to that may have been the Smith store was on the corner there next to the
No,
Masonic?
it was in 2 or 3 houses in.
Oh, okay, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And
that
that
would
street
be
went
Liberty.
from Main Street to 6A.
Yes,
But
that would be Liberty, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
Liberty.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah. So that's where you got your, where did you get, your clothes back then? There weren't a lot of stores.
Well,
Where did people
my
get their-
maternal grandparents did a lot of buying. I always went to visit them. They lived in Bridgewater.
Okay,
And Grandpa and Nana and my Aunt Elise, and they lived in 77 South Street in Bridgewater. And I always spent 2 weeks after school got out. I had 2 weeks up there. One great trip would always go to Boston and ride the swan boats
Oh,
on
boy,
the public
sure.
garden. But they always bought me my school shoes every year and some clothing too.
Okay.
Also, the cousins down south. My grandmother came from Northwest Louisiana, and her sister's grandchildren were just a bit older than I, and when they grew out of things, they sent clothes out.
Oh, wonderful.
So
Yes.
I used to get a whole
Yes.
lot of skirts and
Yes.
things, because there were 2 girls in that family. And things were delivered, though, what was neat. But besides milk,
Yes.
we had the bakery man.
Now tell me about that.
And when you wanted him to stop, you put something in the window.
Oh.
As he drove down 6A, which wasn't called 6A then, it was
Yeah,
called
no.
Route 6,
Yeah.
because 6 wasn't built yet. And he would come, and we got our donuts and our bread and cookies, if my grandmother didn't make cookies from
Yep.
them especially, but donuts and bread.
Now, just for reference purposes, about what year was this in, the time frame? What year
Well,
would
let's
this
see, we
have been?
moved in 30s, the house was all built, and we moved in the fall of 37, and I went to first grade in 38. So, all during the war.
All during the war,
Yeah,
okay.
probably.
Yep.
Because we had no car. Now, 1950, my Aunt Sally came to live with us, and we had a car. But before that, it was until I got a bicycle in 5th grade, which was
Ooh.
called a victory bike.
Oh, boy.
During the war.
Yeah.
Then, I could drive right up and stay after school and visit classmates.
So at that point you drove into Sandwich proper when you had your bike, the center of Sandwich?
Rode up.
Yep.
Yeah, rode up.
On your bike, yep. Yeah. Yeah. So you had milk delivered?
And then fish. Mr. Cahoon.
Oh, sure.
He was a fish man every Friday. I mean, we could get oysters and other goodies.
And he would come door to door?
Door to door.
And you would buy...
My grandmother grew the vegetables. We had three gardens.
Yes. That was not uncommon, was it? A lot of people...
Oh, she was a great vegetable grower.
Was she? Yes.
Yeah, and we also had all sorts of fruit. Raspberries, blueberries, strawberries, and blackberries.
Oh, boy.
Currants. Currants were there when they bought the house, apparently.
Okay.
And
then
quince. We had 8 quince trees, which was the funniest looking fruit. You didn't eat them raw. You could cook them and make lovely jelly, quince jelly.
Now you bring up a good point. You didn't live too far away from the Greenbrier jelly making place.
Yeah.
Now, did you have anything? Did you work there?
No, I didn't happen to, but we did we gave them fruit.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, now especially currants. We could, if a good crop, we'd have about a dozen boxes, quart boxes, and take them over to make currant jelly, which happens to be my favorite. And
Still.
I think I always thought of it as Ida Putnam's rather than Greenbrier at the
Yes,
time.
of course.
And the Jam Kitchen. And she may have been there was a lovely neighborhood club. All the people around Spring Hill gathered together once a month.
Oh,
And
quite often.
yeah, and it was such fun when at our house you'd get out the good china, put the good tablecloth and make tea and all that. And they'd have a special little meeting. But I went over, I do remember why only once Thornton Burgess was giving a talk about his experiences in Puerto Rico with slides. Nothing about the books he wrote.
Okay.
Yeah, and in Miss Putnam's store, or
So he was giving the talk at Miss Putnam's
yeah,
store.
they
yeah.
had the big room where they stored the jellies. The gift shop that's now there was not there. And of course you had the wonderful big kitchen with all the gas burners. And then you'd come in and go to the left and go to the back, and a room that was paneled with wood. And they had a chair set up, and that's where we heard the lecture.
I'll be there.
And that may have been where Miss Putnam had, when it was her turn to have the neighborhood club, they would meet in there. Possibly.
Because
I think she must have lived in the house somewhere.
I don't know.
Come to think of it, I don't know. But she must have lived there, aside having the kitchen.
Besides having the kitchen. So every month, you would go to a different house, and they would host.
And when the new people came in, like Shirley Cross,
Oh, sure, yeah.
which was around 1941, she was invited. And when McKnight's house was sold, and Winnie Houston
Yes.
bought Winnie was invited.
Winnie Fitch Houston, yes, yes.
And she was Winnie Fitch first.
Yes.
And or Phelan too. Come to think of it, Winnie Fitch Phelan, and then she married John Houston after.
Yes.
Yeah, and she was invited in, so
Yes.
she was the youngest member.
Oh, she was, yes.
But
Lovely,
all
lovely
around
woman.
the hill.
How wonderful.
Mrs. Gardner and Mrs. Rose and some of the Frenches. Now, they were uptown people, but they must have lived in East Sandwich at one point. And
Okay.
Mrs. Priscilla.
Mrs. Bertram French?
I think so.
Yes. Yeah, because they did live uptown, but maybe
And then
maybe initially
see,
they lived in.
Freemans were members. Priscilla Freeman's mother. I don't remember her first name. Ralph was the mailman,
Oh, yes.
and his wife was a member.
Yeah.
And Mrs. Tangney, and Isa Foster for a while, but then she moved uptown, and I guess she didn't drive, so she didn't come down. Cora and Beta around the hill, they were members, and I don't know if Martha Blake was, because she was so busy working at Greenbrier.
Yeah, at the kitchen. Yeah.
And Ida Roos. And there were another Roos family, but they must have been older, because I don't remember seeing them much at the meetings, but it wasn't
that wonderful?
And then when
yes.
Inge Walker came in, when the Walkers came in 19, just before the war, so it would have been 40.
40, yeah.
Yeah, or 41, and they bought the Isa Foster's house, who her husband was a painter, but she was a widow at the time. He'd gone to France to paint along with Dodge McKnight, and Will Foster was over there as a dance teacher.
As a dance instructor, yes, yes. Now, you went to H.D. Wing School.
Yeah.
Who were some of your classmates, and how big was your class, your graduating class?
Yeah, when I saw you sent me to think about, actually we were pretty good size.
You were?
We had 21.
That was quite large.
And then
for that time.
And we ended up with 15 because sadly one child passed away, and then a couple stayed back, and a couple moved, and we ended up with 15.
Graduating.
As of 8th grade.
Oh, okay.
And had 15 all the way through to graduation. And there are 8 of us living, of the 15, and 7 live here in Massachusetts on Cape Cod.
Wonderful, yeah.
And we had, I came up from Philadelphia, so we had 7 of us at reunion this and last year too.
This week? Oh.
Last year.
Okay.
In July. The last Saturday in July is reunion time for everybody.
Yes, so you came up to that, yeah.
And we had 7 of us this
Oh,
year.
how nice, yeah.
And Judy Hendy and Barbara Gill.
I was going to ask you if you could tell me the names.
Judy Hendy, Barbara Gill, Connie Carr, Marilyn Myers, Jackie McCardle, Ann Carlson, she lives in Falmouth, and Ruth Ann Van Busker Jappy, she lives Harwichport, I think it is.
Okay.
And me in Philly.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
That you still can be together.
And I had lunch with 3 of them the other day, So that was rather nice. I'm going to try to keep that up every time I come up from Philly.
You did share something with me before the interview about, I think you said 7 of your graduates.
Yeah.
Can you tell
Judy Hendy is quite a genealogist.
Yes, she is.
And so she researched. And because my great-grandmother was a Hallwick-Hoxie combination, makes me related to so many people. So Judy went through the class, and 8 of us out of the 15 are related.
Now yes, that's quite remarkable.
12th and 11th generations. Maybe.
Sure.
One is 4. Tony Carr and I are 4th cousins.
Well, that's quite close,
We're close,
actually.
yes.
Yes.
Somewhere along the line, a Crocker and a Bassett married. And so it's amazing, though. People didn't move.
Yes. Yeah.
And just stayed. And they had huge families. Ours didn't. But that Hallway-Hoxie combination. I just found my sister, again, that great desk, that she said, why don't you take this to the Nye reunion? Because here's something about the Cedarville School. And the little invitation which I gave to John Colatique, because he's so into all the, especially Cedarville, which was all around the Grange. There was quite a community.
Years ago, Cedarville was known as a village of, Sandwich, similar to Forestdale or whatever, and that was mainly in the Old County Road area, was it not? And that was known
I did
as the
not know
Cedarville
this
area.
till I joined this Nye family reunion, that it was called that. And I did know that my great-grandmother and her sisters went to Cedarville School, but I really didn't know where it was.
Where it was.
Well, it was on Old County Road. After you cross the railroad tracks, that little community, gosh, it had a blacksmith, the big house that the Armstrongs owned, which was originally a Nye house, had the library in it. There was a mill, which now the Nye family has bought the building to restore. Not as a mill, but as with a lot of history there.
Yes.
And the Grange came later, but there was a regular store, a lot of houses, and the school.
Yeah, it was a village unto itself.
And this little invitation that I found that was to my grandmother to get together in 1883, all the members were Hallways. one Hoxie, one Nye, and a Ware.
And then the rest, Hallways.
Lots of Hallways. So they must have had a huge family. So.
You brought up just a few minutes ago, and it piqued my interest. Of course, you grew up during the time of World War II. You graduated from H.T. Wing School in 1950. Can you tell me of some recollections of growing up in Sandwich during wartime?
Oh my goodness,
Barbara?
yes. First place, we had to have blackout curtains on every window in the house that faced the ocean.
That faced the ocean.
Poor Mr. Schumacher, being a German name, he was under surveillance. The Navy patrolled in front there because it was the highest point, maybe in Sandwich, but certainly in East Sandwich.
Yes. Now his farm, this house was on Spring Hill Road.
Yes, and way up on top.
Way on a big hill, yes.
The house that Will Foster built called Masthead.
Yes.
The cars had to have half of the headlights were covered with black.
The top half.
Yeah, the top half.
Isn't that? Yeah.
Of course, rationing. I can remember my grandmother on the little blue and red false coins. We had ration books. And they were in dollar amounts. So if you had less than $1, you got these little paper red and blue things as part of the rationing.
So that was sort of like for the cents.
For the cents.
The stamps were the dollars.
Yeah, and there were ration books. I don't remember. Seems to me they were rectangular. Of course, we bought also at school every Monday. You brought in money to buy saving stamps.
Oh, you did.
And then ultimately, when you had 1875, you had a bond. I ended up getting 6. But just on Mondays. Well, Mondays you brought in your money for the food. It was only 10 cents.
For a week.
It was 50 cents a week.
Yes.
And then money to buy stamps. And then you'd put it in your little book. And when the booklet was filled, you had 1875. And then you got a bond.
You got a bond.
And then it matured. But those matured past, 25 years, I guess.
I'm not.
20 years,
I don't
forget
know.
it, but they matured. And then we had all sorts of saving things. Bringing in metal. We would have a scrap drive, that's what it was called. Dig up old pieces of metal, bring it in. We had a big pile in the churchyard, in schoolyard, I mean.
Yeah.
And what else did we? Oh, rubber bands.
Rubber bands.
Elastics, of course, we called them.
Yes.
And
They collected those?
Yeah, oh yeah. And then the cigarette packets were wrapped with foil. And you could peel that foil because aluminum foil had to be saved too.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and
yes.
then of course in 1943 we had the white pennies. No more copper pennies. Copper was so needed for the war effort.
For the war effort, yeah.
And it was quite something to. And gasoline was rationed too. Now, like Arnie Toulis had more because he was a farmer.
Oh, so they would allot him more.
So my aunt Sally worked in Norwich, New York, and he gave her extra coupons so she could come home for Christmas from New York State.
So he sent her extra coupons.
Yes.
So,
yeah. So it was quite.
So
were
there lines like at grocery stores or?
That I don't remember.
Okay, but you had your coupons.
But I bet there was a shortage. Oh, that's when oleo was invented.
Oh, okay.
Except that it couldn't be yellow. The butter companies protested. So you'd get this white stuff in a packet, and then you'd squeeze out a little button kind of thing filled with a liquid that would turn the white to yellow. You had to squeeze it and get the color all through, and then you had yellow butter.
So there was no butter per se, or that was rationed big time.
I don't quite know why, but butter was rationed, gasoline especially, and sugar.
Yep.
But that is not surprising because sugar was imported from, say, South America.
Yeah, and they had to be careful about that. Yeah.
The merchant ships being
torpedoed, they wouldn't. They were careful about where they went. I'm sure.
Then the other big thing that was fun as a kid was to go up to the canal and watch the convoys going through.
Oh.
Now the Sunday paper would print up the ship flags, the other foreign countries' flags. So you'd go up with your paper to see if you could identify.
Oh.
And then if you had foggy nights and they moored out in the bay, you had foghorns all night long because they couldn't go till the fog cleared.
Yeah, till it cleared. So there were quite a few convoys, which makes sense.
Which of course
going
meant
through
the
canal.
trains were always late.
Yes, because the bridges had to go up.
The railroad bridge had to go.
Had to go up to allow the boats through.
Boats had the right of way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And
Yes,
so
yes.
the trains had to.
So as a consequence, the trains were always late.
Because you had a regular train service back and forth to Boston and New York.
Now, did you ever go down to the train and watch people get off? You probably...
Well, I would take the train up to Bridgewater to my grandparents.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad worked in New York, and then he'd come every other weekend up to the Cape. And so he'd get what was called the Friday Nighter.
Now, was there a station in East Sandwich, or did they stop?
We had a lovely station. Unfortunately, that burned in, I don't know, 1970s or so, 80s.
Okay.
With a lovely train station.
And so that's where they stopped, where your father would stop.
Yeah, and Sagamore had a station, West Barnstable had a station. When they came down there was always a long stop in Buzzards Bay, and the trains separated, so one batch went down to Falmouth.
Falmouth, yeah.
And the other to Hyannis, or maybe Yarmouth. I don't know if it went as far as Yarmouth or not. My dad said there was a train all the way out to Wellfleet when he was a kid.
Really? Yeah. People depended on it so much.
And by the time I came along, the East Sandwich train station was no longer being used. Because I've heard about how the East Sandwich people would take a buckboard up to the East Sandwich station and then take the train uptown to go to high school.
Oh.
Yeah, the Carltons told that story.
Yes, they didn't take a bus. They took the train.
Well, back before
Before
buses,
before there
possibly.
was even bus.
Yeah, you could. The buckboard would take the Carlton girls, and I think the Hammond, the Mrs. Hammond, and they'd go to the East Sandwich train station, take the train uptown. Then they had to walk up to the high school, which was up past the town hall and up a hill.
Yeah.
So it was.
Now, when you say buckboard, that was
a wagon with seats.
Yes, and it was.
I'm assuming.
And it was
not a carriage.
No, and it was pulled by horses, of course.
Pulled by horses.
Yes. Yeah.
So.
That was quite something.
Quite simple.
Now, this has been just charming to talk to you, and there were so many things that came out that was so interesting in this conversation, Barbara. I'm so glad you were able to meet. But before we stop, are there any things that you want to, that we haven't touched on, that you especially want to share?
Well, I didn't tell you my favorite teacher, which
Oh,
was
good.
Mrs.
Let's talk about
Mrs.
that.
Snow, which we had her in second grade, and again in fifth.
Yep.
And this Mrs. Freeman,
yes,
which we had in sixth grade, and then she moved upstairs, so we had her in seventh and eighth also. She and Mrs. Mullally shared the junior high, and so Mrs. Freeman she had English and geography, handwriting. I forget what else.
Important in those days, yes.
And so they were lovely, especially Mrs. Snow. Oh my goodness, I was very shy.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Terribly shy. And I remember looking back on it, she thought she had a play going on. And of course, I didn't want to be in it.
No, being shy, yes.
So it was we were studying Holland, so she had me dream the whole show. I sat in a desk with my head down, and then when I came away, as though I fell asleep, when I came awake, there was Dutch cheese, Edam cheese. But then the other kids all acted out the play.
Yes.
I thought that was
well,
so
wasn't
sweet.
that ingenious of her
Sweet. It was.
to get you involved
Yeah, to get
in
me
that
involved.
way? Yes.
That was really lovely.
Yes. Did you have Mrs. Tangney?
No, she
had retired at that point?
38, let's see, it was Mrs. Gannon in first grade, Mrs. Snow in second, Miss Consolini, we were her second year. I really could do multiplication tables. I couldn't add and couldn't subtract, but she really...
You really got
she
the
really got.
multiplication.
And then I don't remember the fourth grade teacher. Then we started out with a Miss Swansea in fifth, and then Mrs. Snow moved up over from second grade. And then we had Mrs. Freeman in sixth, and then upstairs Mrs. Freeman and Mrs. Mullally on seventh and eighth. Now then, it was after the war, by the time we got to high school.
Yes, yes.
And other than Ross Raymond, I don't remember, he was our science teacher.
Yes.
Miss Ancelonia was our English teacher.
Okay.
And I don't remember the others. They're over those 4 years.
Yeah.
But
and some of them stayed for a very, very long time.
And Ross Raymond was our when we went to our class trip to Washington, he and his wife were our chaperones.
Oh,
yeah.
How nice.
And 14 of us out of the 15 went. Yeah.
Wasn't that quite something?
Oh,
from a small town in Sandwich, East Sandwich, going all the way to Washington.
Yeah, it was really great. And, it was a terrific trip. We really loved that. Yeah. We had a frightening thing as I was growing up. In 1938, we had the big hurricane.
Yes.
We also had another one in 44, which was worse. And in the spring of 39, there was a fire. And my grandmother and I, we started watering down the house because the smoke was behind the house. And my grandmother says, now I don't remember this, but she said, we were having a game of it when Mrs. Tangney came across the street, hysterical. Said, your house is going to burn down. And she said, I fell apart. I don't remember it other than I did sit in the living room and see flames. Then I guess the wind changed. But boy, it took years for me not to want to go anywhere near the woods.
Yes,
Woods meant fire.
Yes, for you, yes.
Well, my aunt was wonderful. Sally came to live with us. And Billy Walker and I, she said, why don't we go up and see Mr. Gray in the fire tower and see what's happening? This was the 45 fire after the 44 hurricane, because all that dead wood, you know.
Oh, sure.
So here we
yes.
are walking
That
up
was
Gully
rife.
Lane, because Route 6 wasn't built yet. So you could walk right up Gully Lane, and Mr. Gray always liked you to come up on the fire tower to look. And then we got up and saw all those flames around. But I thought, I can't fall apart in front of Billy. So. And that helped immensely to get over the fear of woods and fire. But that was...
So there was a fire tower in 38, the early 40s, up on top of Gully Lane.
Yeah.
Situated on top of...
Now, it was interesting when we walked up. Before the war, they had made a break. They had cut the path for Route 6,
yes.
But then the war came and they couldn't build it.
Stopped doing it.
But we saw the
track.
The track,
yes,
you know,
yes.
where they'd cut down trees and all. And, of course, ultimately that got built. But, that was quite something. And then, of course, summertime swimming, going to the beach a lot.
Now, where did you go to the beach?
Foster Road.
Of course, yep.
Yeah, and first, though, we learned to swim in the creek at high tide.
Which creek?
Part of Town Creek, but in Spring Hill.
Oh, okay.
If you went on Spring Hill Road and across the railroad tracks, and a little further along in front of a house that Mr. Smith owned and rented it to the Reeses. And he made some steps down.
Oh, did he?
And
yes.
at high tide, there was a little one. Then later, we went to the bigger creek, behind Martha Foster's, Martin. She married 4 times, but she was Martha Martin when I knew her. And she let us go in back, and we could swim in that big creek. And that's when that's where I learned to swim. I remember that. I was 6 years old that summer.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Or 5.5.
Yeah.
And I went with our summer friends, which was Clara Field and her son John, and my cousin Bob, who was spent every summer with us. And the creek at high tide, which must have been 15 feet across.
Oh, yes.
Oh boy, I did it. Then my cousin Betty told me that before the 38 hurricane, they had a bridge across that with a diving board. And all the kids at her age, because there were a lot of kids when she was young, she was 13 years older, and there were quite a lot of people then. And then by the time I came, there weren't a lot of kids.
Yeah.
But she said we used to dive off that. It was really terrific.
Now, I want to make sure I understand. This is on Route 6A.
Yeah.
And it's the bridge. Now, there's a bridge there that goes over.
Now, all was left when I came along were pilings.
Sure, yes.
But apparently the 38 hurricane broke that down.
Yeah.
You know, like 92 hurricane messed up our boardwalk.
Yes, right. But at one time, Betty Foster Pierce was telling you that there was a diving board there.
Now, let's see,
Isn't
who
that
else
something?
would she have gone with? There were Honans.
Sure.
And she and her brother. Who else? I don't know. Who are the other young people there? But anyhow.
In that area, yeah.
Possibly the Lawrences, which was in a big house on the hill there past mine. Let's see. We had our house and the Smiths and the Rooses and the Van Vlecks, and then the big house. There was a cranberry bar and then a big house, and the Lawrences were in there. They were all high school people, so much older. So they might have.
They may have used the.
But so anyhow, and I don't know whether there were Elvanders older or Ericksons that came, but anyhow, there was quite a group.
There was quite a group that
used that, and then of course they were so disappointed. Yeah.
When it came down, yeah.
So, then we had my Aunt gave us a boat, and across the street was the pond, Mr. Gardner's pond.
Yep.
We learned to skate there. And row a boat.
And row a boat.
Yeah. We had a little 8-foot boat.
Wonderful times.
Yes, it
growing
was.
up.
Great
Yes.
growing up.
Yes.
And Billy and I did a lot of exploring. Especially up at Masthead, and that was the most exciting. One wing is shaped like a boat.
Yes.
And it had a ladder. So he and I climbed up, and we peered into a room. Turned out it was a bathroom. Black marble with gold spigots or faucets.
Isn't that
Oh,
something?
gold looking.
Wow,
Oh,
yeah.
that was exciting.
That was very...
We felt so dark. And
Yes.
then we discovered there was a pond on top of Spring Hill, which of course makes sense, a spring-fed pond. But nobody had ever told us. So of course we came home and told them, and they knew it already.
They knew it already. You thought you had made a big discovery, yes. And that was up at Masthead, too.
Yeah, behind Masthead.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And at that time, Mr. Schumacher owned it. He was quite a botanist.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
my goodness.
Yeah, he had some beautiful bushes and trees and whatever
I
up
hope
there, did he
sometime
not?
you can talk with Irving Freeman, because he worked there and he has grand stories about
Really?
Mr.
Oh, we'll
Schumacher
try
up
to do
there.
that, yeah, yeah.
And so,
Well, this has been wonderful.
Thank you.
I am so glad,
I'm glad I
that we
could-
were able to arrange this.
okay.
And I'm just going to say thank you for listening and looking at this video. Again, it is brought to you by the Friends of the Sandwich Town Archives, and we thank you for watching.
Okay.
That was wonderful,
you're
Barbara.
welcome.
Oh my gosh, some of those stories I had
Oh, and I
never
never
heard.
mentioned-
Oh, we always do that. What? We could.
Miss Cooks going over to watch her feed the skunks and the raccoons.
Oh, did you
Oh.
used to do that?
Yeah, but if you get Irving Freeman, because she and Priscilla went far more often than I ever did.
Okay.
Now, I got to visit different people because my grandmother was such a gardener.
Yeah.
That you
Yeah.
went to deliver things.
Yeah.
Like Mrs. Mullally across the pond was the first person in the neighborhood who had a TV.
Oh, really?
And then I always told my grandma, don't you think Mrs. Mullally would like some strawberries? Or don't you think Mrs. Mullally,
So she would-
couldn't we take some of the corn? We got so much corn, couldn't we? I wanted
Yeah.
to see the television.
Mrs. Mullally was my great-grandmother.
The 8th grade teacher. No.
That Mullally.
Yeah.
She was married to Bill Mullally, who was my great-uncle.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah,
really?
Bill was my great-uncle. Yeah.
Yeah, now I don't know where they lived before they moved to Spring Hill. And they bought the Nye house on Nye Road. On the corner, Shirley Cross was on the corner, right, the railroad. And
Yes.
then there's the Nye house.
Yes.
And there's a house here, which I found out from this Nye, it was a Nye house. And then there was Skiff House where the Orchids lived,
Yes, yes, yeah.
which was the only other young person, but she was a junior in high school when I was a freshman, so.
Well, when the Mullallies came down from Nova Scotia, eventually they bought the house, you know where the Twin Ponds are, of course, in Henry
Yes.
Hall, across the street from Henry Hall. That was the Mullally homestead for quite a while.
Oh, yes.
Yes, yeah.
I'd forgotten that.
Yeah.
I was thinking there was no house there. You're right.
Yeah, and she had, at
That's
one
right.
time, Bill Mullally, Mrs. Mullally's husband, he had some gas pumps there. They sold gasoline.
Yes, they did.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Oh my gosh, I
Yeah.
remember they were called filling stations.
Yes, oh, they were in those days, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'll be darned, yeah.
One of your questions, which we didn't get to, about the telephone.
Oh,
That
yes.
was funny. Naturally, they were party lines. Now we had 4. We heard one ring,
Yep.
but heard 3 other voices. Now Shirley Cross was 2 rings and ours was 1, or the other way around. But when they were out gardening and the phone rang and they didn't hear it, but we did, I'd go out front and yell across the pond, "You're fired!" Now Mrs. Tangney had an 8-party line where
Oh
you
my
heard
gosh.
your own number, your own ring,
Yeah.
and 3 others.
Yeah.
But you'd hear 7 other people's voices. I bet she listened in.
I bet a lot of people listened in.
Because, of course, if we picked up the phone and Shirley or Chet we'd just hang up.
Yeah, yeah.
Because, oh, wait a minute, we had 2 others. I don't know who the other 2 were. And Mr. McKnight had a private phone.
Oh, so he didn't have a party line.
No, his number was 35.
I'll be darned.
Ours
That was it.
Ours was 373W, Sagamore.
Yeah,
Yeah, not Sandwich, Sagamore.
yeah.
When I called from Philadelphia, if I didn't do it clear enough, I'd get Sagamore, Michigan.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Actually, it was Saginaw.
But they
But
didn't
they, yeah.
understand
Then
when you...
I ultimately got the routing, So if I wanted, I got the whole routing, which was 617 down plus 2, 3, I don't know. But
Yeah, no, I remember those days too. I remember our house was 129J. The store's number was 254R.
yeah,
My aunt's number was 207J.
yeah.
Those are the days, weren't
Weren't they?
And you know, I don't want to insert myself too much in these, but I had Vima Consolini, I had Mrs. Russell, I had Mrs. Snow, I had Mr. Raymond. Did you have Mrs. Strain?
No, she came after.
She
came after.
Did you have, no, you wouldn't have had Nora Bianchi.
No, because she came
After.
When Mrs. Snow moved to 5th grade,
Yeah.
Nora came in.
Oh,
I think.
okay.
She was a Michelson.
Yep, Nora Michelson.
Mrs. Michelson was such a dear.
Yes.
The worst thing that could happen, we caught smoking down the basement, down in the cellar.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, yeah, and a lot of kids did, I imagine.
You know what was interesting when you think about today's world? Those of us who went to school on the bus on Wednesday afternoons could walk down to the library to get books. Unattended, there was no teacher that walked with us.
Yeah.
Because my East Sandwich was Barbara Luxton, Lois Armstrong, myself, and Ruth Van Buskert. And there were 4 of us from our class,
Yep.
plus Connie Crocker, and Karsten Howland if he was interested,
Yep.
because we would walk.
Connie talked about that in the interview
Yeah.
I did with her, Connie Carr.
Yeah.
Talked about at a certain point in the school day,
Yeah.
you would walk down to the library.
And I'm thinking now, I mean, no teachers.
No, that's what she said too.
And
Yeah.
we came back.
Yep.
Well, those of us, we had to get back for the bus, otherwise it was a mighty long walk home, or
Yeah.
felt like it.
Yeah.
I missed the bus once. Oh, that was all. So, ooh,
That was a bit of a walk for you.
Well, we got out of school, and let's see. I don't think the East Sandwich bus went first, so we were playing in the backyard.
Yeah.
And
And
then
didn't hear it.
Didn't hear it. And then, let's see, in my class, Connie and Carson were up in Forestdale. And the 4 of us were in East Sandwich, and the rest are town kids.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
So-
what she said too. There weren't many in the
Yeah,
Forest
because
area either.
now Johnny lived the farthest away. He was on Old County Road, almost to the end, near Sagamore End. But Jackie was on the road to the Town Neck Road, I think it's called.
Yeah.
That Jackie was there, but right in town, my goodness, Marilyn lived by the railroad tracks. Ann was across the railroad tracks. Judy lived. Oh, at one point Judy was uptown. I mean, up in Forestdale.
Oh, really? She moved around. Yeah.
Yeah, she lived in when her dad was living. He was a school bus. Oh, I remember that day, 8th grade. They called Judy out to come to the principal's office, and I thought, gee, what did she do? And that was to tell her dad had a heart attack driving the school bus. But they lived up on one of the ponds, and their house was called the Hermitage. And then they came back.
Oh, yes.
They came back. Now, you know, on Jarvis Street, next to where A.B.'s store was, there is that apartment-like building.
Yes, Alice Hall used to own that.
Well, that's where
Yes.
Judy and her mother lived, or
Oh.
her stepmother lived for
Okay.
a while, until they got to the house on the hill where Judy lived with when she was married. So she moved around a bit. Let's see, who else was in our class? Oh, Grizzy. Liberty Street. Yeah, he lived with the Kershaws.
Oh, yes, Mrs. Kershaw.
Mrs. Kershaw. June is an artist, and her daughter, both of them in the consignment shop. June does
Yes,
jewelry,
on,
and her daughter is a fabulous photographer.
Yes. Now, was June, did she,
was
was
a
she in
year
your
ahead of
grade?
us.
She was a year ahead.
Yeah.
I
They
remember-
had only, I think they only had 13 or 11 in the 49er class.
Now, Mrs. Kershaw, was it Betty Kershaw? She
And
taught,
Mabel Luxon and worked in the kitchen.
yes, but at a certain point, Mrs. Kershaw, at least when I was there, that would be back in the 60s, the 1960s, she taught
Did she?
sewing and cooking, and yeah, she was a
Oh,
teacher.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Like home ec, yeah.
You know, we also had, we learned how to make a bed with a person in it. forget what that was.
So like for nursing
There was
purposes?
there was a name for it. We also, the dentist, wow, we had great hearing tests. We also had the TB tests every 2 years.
Yeah.
The
school was
the
responsible
dentist.
for
The
a lot.
dentist came. Oh, I hated that. I was so scared of the dentist. Yeah, the dentist would come to school and do. But I remember the hearing tests we had. My goodness.
Yeah.
We
I
had a
remember
music,
those too.
We had a music teacher up until the war came, and then I guess they lost the funds.
So you didn't have Nan McCann
Yeah,
as a
but
music
that was
teacher?
later. That was, yes, she was there. Oh, did you see the nice article about Mr. Quersey?
Yes.
Oh, I looked at that. I never knew that was how his name was spelled.
I
thought it was I didn't think it was Q-U, Quersey.
Quersey.
But it was great to read about that. I remember
My
he
father
directed the
used to
band.
talk about him a lot because Dad was part of his band. Daddy played in the band. He played the trumpet, and trombone.
Yeah.
And I remember Dad talking about that when they opened up the Sagamore Bridge in 1935. They had a big celebration, of course, and the band went over the bridge, and he was part of that band with Mr. Quersey directing. But I didn't know that he dropped dead like that.
No, I didn't know that. 1950, in the middle of
Can you imagine?
4th of July, was it Memorial
Festivities,
Day?
yes.
Oh, because that parade.
He was really beloved,
that
I know
parade
that.
was so wonderful. And, I always loved that, because afterwards, we always went to DW,
Yeah.
and we had steamed clams.
Oh, that was the thing.
They had red and white checkered tablecloth.
Well, were you like a Bluebird, a Campfire Girl? Did you
No,
march
I
in-
was a Girl Scouts for a little
Girl
bit.
Scout.
Yeah, but the Bluebirds was the bigger, as I remember, more of my classmates were in the Bluebird.
That was really big because you remember
Yeah.
Bertha Pierce.
Yes.
She had
Not quite round.
Yes. Well, she had some sort of condition. Yes.
Yes,
Aunt
and she
Bertha.
was very, very, because that was much bigger
Yes.
than this Girl Scouts,
Yeah,
as I recall.
yeah, she really had the town
Really
locked
great.
up with the
Yeah.
Bluebirds and the Campfire Girls. She was quite something.
Did Connie tell you about, because she was in the town band for years with her
Yes.
tuba.
Yeah.
And, there were so many musical people in my class. And then when I think about, I never joined anything. When I was in high school, the girls were champions basketball of the Cape.
Yes, Judy Hendy was quite a basketball player, wasn't she? Yes.
Yeah, Connie, Judy, Marilyn, Lois, and Ruth Ann. Yeah, five of our 10 girls were in. And that's when you had 6 on a side and you didn't cross the middle.
No, and you had 2 dribbles and that was it.
Yeah.
And you had Ed Zion too. I had Ed Zion.
No, we didn't.
Oh,
we
thought
did not.
Judy said you had Ed Zion.
Oh,
Well,
as
the coach.
Oh yes, definitely. Right.
Yes.
He was. Yes.
Yes.
Because
Yeah,
he
he
came
was
back
the-
from the war and got to teach in Mrs. That's why Mrs. Freeman moved upstairs to 7th grade.
Yeah,
because he came back
he's-
to his class.
He started teaching too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Gertrude told me that when she got the job, it used to be that married teachers couldn't teach, married persons couldn't teach.
Yes, I've heard that. That is.
She told me that, but because of the war and men going into service, so
Yeah.
many, they hired married teachers. That really floored me.
That's something. God, how times have changed.
So Mrs. Gannon must have been a widow. And Mrs. Snow must have been a widow.
They were.
And older not to have. Well, I think they didn't want pregnant teachers.
They were. Mrs. Gannon lived in State Street. She lived 2 houses down from my grandparents. She had, Rita McQuaid. Remember, she eventually married John McQuaid, who became
Yeah.
Rita had 2 brothers. But Mrs. Gannon was a widow. I don't know when her husband died.
I didn't learn arithmetic very well, but I sure learned how to read. But then my grandmother got sick with pneumonia that winter, probably January 39, and we went down south where her sister lived. To
Try to recuperate.
I spent 4 months down there at school. I hated that school.
Well, of course you did. You missed Sandwich.
Mrs. Snow tutored me to get into second grade. Looking back on it, I really should have repeated first. I was so behind.
Yeah.
But I remember
But you did okay.
I did okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You went through every
Let's
class.
see, of our class, I think 5 of us went on to, well, it was interesting. The Korean War started.
Yes.
The year we graduated.
Yep, 1950.
And the Air Force, it was now Air Force Base. Marilyn married Air Force, Connie married Air Force, Lois married a homebody, Joanne married Air Force, and Barbara married the milkman. Oh, that.
And Barbara married the milkman.
Yeah, Clyde delivered milk.
Yes, I know. I remember.
Before he became
I remember he worked for
policeman.
Roberti. Yeah.
He is such a dear. When we were having lunch together last Friday, it was his 87th birthday.
Was it really?
Yeah.
I'll be darned.
And when they had their 50th, they had such a, I went, because that was the only wedding of my classmates that I happened to get to, because but it was in July, and I was home on vacation, and my grandmother and I went, and she had I'd forgotten that. It was the Federated Church.
Oh, yeah.
You get married. Little remember.